When the CEO's nephew slammed his palm on my desk and said, "Give me all your passwords or you're fired," he thought he was in control until he opened a drive labeled Q4 Reorg Backups and found a time-stamped folder called Insurance Read Before Firing Me. The smirk on his face disappeared faster than our stock price after last quarter's data breach. He didn't know that drive was bait, that every click was being logged, or that I'd been preparing for this moment since the day he walked through our doors with his uncle's blessing and zero qualifications. My name is Emily Barrett, and for 8 years, I've been the Director of System Security at Nevlin Analytics. I've weathered 3 CEOs, 5 major data breaches that weren't ours, and countless attempts by competitors to poach our proprietary algorithms. I thought I'd seen it all. Then Troy Kendrick walked through our glass doors on a Monday morning in March, trailing cologne expensive enough to pay my team's coffee budget for a month. The email announcing his arrival had come the previous Friday at 4:45 p.m., carefully timed, so most of us would miss it in the weekend exodus. Please welcome Troy Kendrick as our new head of digital growth. No background, no qualifications, just a title that meant nothing and access that meant everything. I knew who he was, of course. CEO Marcus Nevlin's nephew, fresh out of his 3rd attempt at an MBA, with a LinkedIn profile that screamed connections over competence. His previous job titles read like corporate Mad Libs synergy catalyst at his uncle's friend's startup, innovation architect at a company that folded after 6 months, digital transformation evangelist at a firm I'd never heard of. That first week, Troy prowled our floors like he owned them. He scheduled alignment meetings with every department head, always at inconvenient times, always with vague agendas. He'd lean against doorframes, studying our security protocols with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered Wikipedia. I should have seen it coming when he started asking questions about our server architecture during his courtesy visit to my department. He sat in my office, designer sneakers propped on my guest chair, spinning his phone between his fingers. "So, Emily," he said, drawing out my name like we were old friends. "Tell me about our data fortress. How many layers of security are we talking?" I gave him the sanitized tour, the version we share with board members and auditors. Enough to sound impressive. Nothing that could compromise us. He nodded along, but his eyes had that hungry look I'd seen before in people who think they're smarter than they are. "And you manage all the master access codes?" he asked it casually, like he was inquiring about the weather. "I manage security protocols," I corrected. "Access is compartmentalized according to our ISO 27001 certification requirements." Right, he waved his hand dismissively. "But someone has to have the keys to the kingdom, right? In case of emergencies." "We have procedures for emergencies." That should have been the end of it, but Troy Kendrick wasn't interested in procedures. The second week, he started showing up at our morning security briefings uninvited. He'd sit in the back, taking notes on his tablet with theatrical concentration. My team exchanged glances but said nothing. What do you say when the CEO's nephew decides your meetings are his new hobby? By the 3rd week, the requests started. Could he have temporary access to our client analytics dashboard? He was exploring synergies. Could he sit in on our vulnerability assessments? He wanted to understand our defensive posture. Each request came with the implied weight of his last name, delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes. I denied them all, politely but firmly, citing security protocols and compliance requirements. Each denial was met with a thoughtful nod and a, "I understand completely," followed by an email to my boss asking the same question from a different angle. Then came that Monday morning, 9:15 a.m. sharp. I was reviewing our weekend logs when Margaret from HR knocked on my door. Her face had that carefully neutral expression that meant nothing good. "Emily, could you join us in Conference Room C? It's regarding a new digital initiative." Conference Room C was the one without windows, the one where they'd laid off half of data science last year. I locked my workstation, grabbed my phone, and followed Margaret down the hall. Troy was already there, lounging in the chair at the head of the table like he'd been born to it. Beside him sat our CTO, David Park, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. No one from legal, no one from compliance. Just Troy's satisfied smile and David's uncomfortable silence. Emily. Troy gestured to a chair across from him. Thanks for making time. I know you're busy keeping us safe from the bad guys. I sat, waited, let the silence stretch until David finally cleared his throat. Troy has been developing a new approach to our data infrastructure, David said, reading from notes he wouldn't meet my eyes over. A more agile framework that would allow us to respond more quickly to market opportunities. Interesting, I said. I haven't seen any proposals come through security review. That's actually why we're here. Troy leaned forward, his executive cosplay reaching new heights. We need to move fast on this, real fast. I'm talking about a complete overhaul of how we handle data access. Any changes to data access need to go through. I know. He cut me off with that dismissive wave I'd come to hate. Procedures and protocols, but here's the thing. Emily, we're bleeding opportunities while our competitors are sprinting. By the time we go through your whole song and dance, the market's moved on. David shifted in his seat. He'd been CTO for 6 years. He knew better, but he also knew who signed his checks. What specifically are you proposing? I kept my voice level, professional. Troy's smile widened. I need administrative access to all systems. Today, we're going to revolutionize how Nevlin Analytics operates, but I can't do it if I'm locked out of my own company's infrastructure. It's not your company, I said quietly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Excuse me. I said it's not your company. It's Nevlin Analytics. We have shareholders, clients, regulatory obligations. We don't hand out admin access like carnival prizes. Troy's face flushed. He turned to David. Is she always this difficult? David opened his mouth, then closed it. In 6 years, he'd never seen me be anything but professional, but he'd also never seen me cornered by a nepotism hire with delusions of competence. Troy stood abruptly, his chair rolling back to hit the wall. He walked around the table slowly, deliberately, until he was standing next to my chair. Then he slammed his palm down on the table hard enough to make David's coffee jump. Give me all your passwords or you're fired. I looked up at him calmly. I'll need that directive in writing. From legal. With compliance sign-off. I am giving you a direct order. You're not in my reporting structure. David, tell her. David looked miserable. Emily, perhaps we could find a compromise. No, I stood, gathering my phone. No compromise on security. If you want to fire me for doing my job, I'll need that in writing too. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, and Troy. If you attempt to access any systems without proper authorization, you'll trigger our insider threat protocols. That's not a threat. That's a promise. The last thing I saw before I left was Troy's face, twisted with the kind of rage that comes from hearing the word no for the first time in your life. I should have gone straight back to my office, should have started documenting everything, backing up my files, preparing for the storm I knew was coming. Instead, I stopped by the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and took 3 deep breaths. 8 years. 8 years of building these systems, protecting this company, and now some overgrown frat boy wanted to tear it all down because his uncle gave him a meaningless title and an office with a view. When I finally made it back to my desk, there was already an email waiting, from Troy, CC'd to Marcus, David, and half the executive team. Emily, following up on our productive meeting, please provide all system passwords and administrative access codes by close of business today. This is time sensitive. TK. I stared at the screen. Productive meeting. The little bastard was already rewriting history. That's when I noticed something else. My laptop, the one I keep locked in my drawer. It was sitting on my desk, slightly off-center, the USB port facing the wrong direction. Someone had been in my office while I was gone. I pulled up our security logs, my fingers flying across the keyboard. There it was, 10:27 a.m., my office door accessed with an override code, a code that required C-suite authorization. Troy might have been an idiot, but he wasn't working alone. I reached into my desk drawer, past the laptop that had been moved, past the backup drives I cycled through weekly, until my fingers found what I was looking for, a small, unremarkable USB drive labeled Q4 Reorg Backups. I'd prepared this 3 years ago, after another executive's nephew had tried something similar. That one had only lasted 2 weeks before an unfortunate incident with the SEC. But I'd learned my lesson. When you work in corporate America long enough, you realize that the biggest threats don't come from hackers in hoodies. They come from men in designer suits who think the rules don't apply to them. I plugged the drive into my tertiary laptop, the one not connected to any network, and smiled for the first time all morning. Troy Kendrick wanted to play games fine, but he'd just entered my arena, and I'd been preparing for this match longer than he'd been pretending to earn his MBA. The drive hummed to life, revealing folders within folders, each one carefully crafted, each one waiting for someone exactly like Troy to come along and try to take what wasn't his. He wanted my passwords. He'd get them, just not the ones he was expecting. The USB drive I'd prepared wasn't just any backup. It was a carefully constructed maze of breadcrumbs, each folder designed to look legitimate while secretly functioning as a digital tripwire. 3 years ago, after the last incident with executive overreach, I'd spent my own time and money setting up an entirely separate monitoring system, one that existed outside Nevland's infrastructure, invisible to anyone who might gain unauthorized access to our internal tools. I called it the Canary Drive, named after the old mining practice. If someone went where they shouldn't, this little bird would sing. By 3:30 p.m., Troy had made his move. I was in a meeting with our Singapore team when my personal phone buzzed with an alert. Someone had just accessed my secondary laptop, the one he'd found in my drawer. The tracking beacon I'd embedded in the drive activated the moment it was plugged in. I excused myself from the meeting and walked calmly to the server room, using the biometric scanner that Troy's override codes couldn't touch. From there, I could watch everything unfold on systems he didn't even know existed. The drive's root directory appeared innocent enough. Q4 Pipeline Analysis, 2024 Restructure Drafts, Budget Allocation Notes, Compliance Archives, and buried among 20 other folders, one labeled simply, Just in Case. Each folder was weighted with fake file sizes, appearing to contain gigabytes of data. In reality, they were mostly padding junk data wrapped around very specific honeypots. Troy wasn't subtle. His access pattern showed he went straight for just in case after a cursory glance at the others. The folder opened to reveal subdirectories, performance reviews confidential, termination protocols, executive compensation analysis, and insurance read before firing me. He took the bait like a starving fish. The moment he opened insurance read before firing me, my tracking system logged everything: IP address, machine ID, network credentials, even the active user account. But more importantly, it triggered a silent duplication protocol. Every file he accessed, every document he copied, every action he took was being mirrored to my off-site server in real time. Inside that folder, he found documents that would make any ambitious corporate climber salivate. Spreadsheets showing suspicious patterns in stock allocations, email threads discussing Project Downstream, a reorganization plan that would consolidate power under a new digital infrastructure, memos about creating positions for key stakeholders' family members. All of it was real, pulled from public SEC filings and quarterly reports, reorganized to tell a story that was technically true, but contextually explosive. But here's the beautiful part. I hadn't created any of this. I'd simply collected publicly available information and organized it in a way that would be irresistible to someone like Troy. If questioned, I could truthfully say I'd never fabricated a single document. I'd just been very thorough in my research. The crown jewel was a file labeled Authentication Backup Secure .xlsx. It looked like exactly what Troy was hunting for: a spreadsheet of system passwords. The file was encrypted, but the password was hidden in the metadata of another document in the same folder. I knew he'd find it. People like Troy always think they're clever enough to crack simple puzzles. When he opened it, He found exactly what he expected, a comprehensive list of usernames and passwords for various systems, admin accounts, service accounts, backup access codes, all formatted perfectly, all looking completely legitimate, all completely useless. Every single credential was for our honeypot environment, a parallel system I'd set up that looked identical to our production infrastructure, but contained nothing but fabricated data and tracking mechanisms. The moment someone used those credentials, it would log their every keystroke, every query, every attempted data export. But Troy didn't know that. He was too busy copying everything to his own device, probably already imagining the brave new world he'd create once he had the keys to the kingdom. By 5 p.m., I received another email, this time from HR. Emily, please report to Conference Room A at 5:15 p.m. for a mandatory meeting regarding organizational restructuring. Margaret Hollis, Senior HR Director. Conference Room A, the one with windows, the one where they'd promoted our last CSO. Interesting choice. I arrived to find a full panel Margaret from HR. David looking even more uncomfortable than this morning. Our General Counsel, Patricia Wong. And of course, Troy, sitting at the head of the table like he'd already won. Patricia spoke first. Emily, we need to discuss your role going forward in light of our new digital transformation initiative. Of course, I said, taking a seat. I'm always happy to support properly vetted initiatives. Troy couldn't contain himself. Cut the act. Emily, you've been obstructing progress since day one. Marcus agrees it's their time for fresh perspectives in key positions. His time? I noted Patricia's subtle correction. She'd been with Nevlin for 15 years. She knew how to play the game. Margaret slid a folder across the table. We're offering you a transition to a new role, technical compliance clerk, reporting to the digital growth team. I opened the folder. Scanning the offer, the salary was insulting, a 60% cut. The responsibilities were non-existent, basically a glorified note-taker with no direct reports, no system access, no authority. But it was the non-compete clause that made me almost laugh out loud. This non-compete, I said slowly, prohibits me from working in data security, systems analysis, technical consulting, education, or any field involving information technology for 5 years, within a 200-mile radius. Standard language, Troy said quickly. We need to protect our intellectual property. This would prohibit me from teaching basic computer skills at a community center, I pointed out. It says I can't breathe near any computational device in a professional capacity. Patricia shifted slightly. The language may need some refinement. The language is fine, Troy interrupted. Sign it or clean out your desk. I looked at each face around the table. David wouldn't meet my eyes. Margaret was studying her manicure. Patricia was watching me carefully, her expression unreadable. I'll need time to review this with my attorney, I said. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Troy said. Sign it or you're terminated for insubordination. And if I sign it? Then you'll transition immediately to your new role. We've already arranged for your replacement to take over your current responsibilities. My replacement? Of course. I wondered which of Troy's connections was about to become our new director of systems security. I understand, I said, closing the folder. May I ask who'll be taking over my role? Troy's grin widened. I will, temporarily, of course, just until we find the right permanent candidate. There it was, the whole game laid bare. He didn't just want my passwords, he wanted my job, my reputation, my entire professional identity, and he thought he'd won. I see, I said, standing. I'll have an answer for you by 9 a.m. As I walked to the door, Patricia spoke up. Emily, make sure you return all company property before you leave today. Laptops, drives, access cards, everything. I turned back, meeting her gaze. Of course, everything that belongs to the company. The emphasis was subtle, but Patricia caught it. Her slight nod told me she understood. The drive Troy had stolen wasn't company property, it was mine. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously documenting every file transfer, every access log, Every digital fingerprint Troy had left on my honeypot drive. My personal tracking system showed he'd already tried 4 of the passwords, triggering alerts in our honeypot environment that only I could see. By 8 p.m., the office was mostly empty. I packed my personal items slowly, methodically, leaving everything exactly as it should be. Company laptop, wiped and returned, access cards, deactivated and surrendered. But the small USB drive that had started it all, that stayed with me. As I walked out of Nevlin Analytics, for what might be the last time, my phone buzzed with another alert. Troy had just attempted to access our primary financial database using one of the honeypot credentials. Everything was in place. My decision to take their humiliating deal and watch Troy collapse under his own ambition, or refuse, and let him taste a hollow victory. I sat in my car in the parking garage, watching the executive floor windows. Troy's office. His uncle's gift to him was still lit. He was probably up there right now, trying every password on that list, convinced he was about to become the boy genius who revolutionized Nevlin Analytics. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., they wanted my answer. They thought they had me cornered, forced to choose between submission and unemployment. They had no idea what I'd been building in the shadows for the past 3 years. They had no idea that every move Troy made was being recorded, cataloged, and stored far beyond their reach. Most importantly, they had no idea that I'd already chosen option 3. I started my car and drove home, my phone continuously buzzing with alerts as Troy's digital rampage continued. Each notification was another nail in a coffin he was building himself. By tomorrow morning, I'd give them exactly what they wanted. I'd sign their papers, accept their demotion, and become the compliant little clerk they thought they could bury. And then I'd wait. Because Troy Kendrick was about to learn what happened when you tried to steal from someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for exactly this moment. The best part, he'd already given me everything I needed. He just didn't know it yet. I arrived at 8:45 a.m. the next morning, 15 minutes before my deadline. The executive floor was already buzzing with activity. Troy's brave new world was apparently starting early. I caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces in departments that had been stable for years. The reorganization had already begun. Margaret was waiting in conference room A with the same folder from yesterday, plus a new addition, a standard exit interview form. Troy sat beside her, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd spent most of the night playing with his stolen passwords. Good. Emily, Margaret began, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. Have you made your decision? I sat down carefully, placing my own folder on the table. I have some questions first. Troy's jaw tightened. This isn't a negotiation. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. I think you'll want to hear this. I set it to record, placing it prominently on the table. For clarity, I'm recording this conversation. I trust that's acceptable. Margaret glanced at Troy, who shrugged with affected nonchalance. We have nothing to hide. Excellent. I opened my folder. First, I'd like to clarify the terms of this role transition. Technical compliance clerk. Could you define the specific duties? Margaret fumbled with her notes. You'll be supporting the digital growth team with documentation, meeting notes, and administrative tasks as needed. So no technical responsibilities, no system access, no involvement in security protocols. That's correct, Troy jumped in. We need someone fresh in those areas, someone who understands modern approaches. I see, and this non-compete clause, it's quite comprehensive. I wouldn't even be able to work at a Best Buy, would I? The language protects our interests, Margaret recited. It's standard for positions with access to sensitive information. But I won't have access to sensitive information in the clerk role. Will I? Silence. Patricia Wong would have caught that logical inconsistency immediately, but she wasn't here today. Interesting. The clause covers your previous access, Troy said finally. What you already know. I nodded, making notes. And this is the only option: sign or be terminated. For insubordination and failure to comply with direct orders, Troy confirmed. a hint of satisfaction in his voice. No severance, no references, your choice. I looked at the contract for a long moment, then picked up the pen. Then I'll sign. Troy couldn't hide his surprise. He'd expected a fight, threats of lawyers, maybe even begging. Instead, I signed each page methodically, taking photos of every single one with my phone before sliding them back across the table. Congratulations, I said quietly. You've successfully demoted a director to a clerk. I'm sure that'll look impressive on your quarterly achievements. Margaret quickly collected the papers. Your new workspace is on the 3rd floor, desk 3B47. Your supervisor will meet you there at 10 a.m. to discuss your duties. And my system access, revoked as of... Margaret checked her watch. 9:05 a.m. Your replacement has already assumed those responsibilities. I stood, gathering my things. One last question. For the record, who approved Troy's access to my office yesterday? The override code used at 10:27 a.m. Margaret's face went pale. Troy's expression hardened. I don't know what you're talking about, he said flatly. No, that's interesting. Our security logs show someone used C-suite override codes to access my locked office while I was in conference room C. But if you're not aware of it, I suppose it must have been a system glitch. I smiled pleasantly. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. I left them sitting there, Troy's confident facade cracking slightly. He'd been so focused on winning, he hadn't considered I might be documenting his victory. Desk 3B47 was a cramped cubicle in the building's administrative wasteland, squeezed between the supply closet and the service elevator. My new supervisor turned out to be Bradley Chen from Digital Growth, a 23-year-old fresh graduate who couldn't meet my eyes when he explained my duties. So, basically you'll be taking meeting notes and, organizing files? He shifted nervously. Troy said you're really good with documentation. I'll do whatever's needed, I said calmly, settling into my discount office chair. The first week was an exercise in corporate humiliation. I fetched coffee, formatted PowerPoints, and sat silently in meetings where Troy systematically dismantled every security protocol I'd spent 8 years building. He brought in consultants who nodded along with his revolutionary ideas, most of which would have failed basic compliance audits. But I documented everything, every meeting, every decision, every casual comment about finally getting rid of the dead weight. My personal phone recorded audio when permitted. My meticulous notes captured every detail, and my tracking system kept singing its digital song as Troy continued using those honeypot credentials. The alerts were fascinating. He'd moved from simple access attempts to full data exports, downloading what he thought were client lists, financial records, and proprietary algorithms. In reality, he was collecting carefully crafted fiction data that looked real enough to pass casual inspection, but would crumble under any serious analysis. 2 weeks into my new role, I made a decision. During my lunch break, I drove to a small office building downtown, the kind of place that housed law firms, accountants, and consulting groups that preferred to stay under the radar. Ridgefire occupied the entire 4th floor. No sign on the door, just a suite number. I'd first heard about them 3 years ago. Whispered conversations at security conferences about a firm that specialized in helping tech professionals who'd been burned by corporate politics. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Ms. Barrett, they're expecting you. The conference room was elegant in its simplicity. 3 people waited inside James Morrison, former CTO of a Fortune 500 company who'd blown the whistle on his CEO's insider trading, Dr. Sarah Kim, who'd exposed algorithmic bias in her previous employer's hiring software, and Robert Carver, whose name you'd recognize if you followed the Techron scandal 5 years ago. Emily, James stood, extending his hand. We've been wondering when you'd join us. You've been monitoring the situation. Sarah smiled. We monitor all the major players. When Troy Kendrick started making waves at Nevlin, we figured it was only a matter of time before someone got burned. I'm not looking for revenge, I said carefully. I'm looking for justice. In our experience, Robert said, pulling out a tablet. They're often the same thing. Tell us what you have. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything: the unauthorized access, the stolen drive, the honeypot system, the forced demotion, the non-compete that would essentially end my career. They took notes, asked pointed questions, and exchanged meaningful glances. The non-compete is vulnerable, Sarah said finally. Technical compliance clerk isn't substantially similar to director of system security. They've essentially invalidated it by changing your role so dramatically. But that's not the interesting part, James added, studying the access logs I'd shared. This pattern of unauthorized system access, has he used any of this data yet? He's presenting his digital transformation initiative to the board next week, I said. Based on my tracking, he's planning to use the fake financial projections to justify a complete infrastructure overhaul, one that would coincidentally require hiring his former MBA classmates as consultants. Robert leaned back, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. And when those projections prove to be fiction, he'll blame bad data, legacy systems, previous management. I met their eyes. Me. Unless, Sarah said slowly, someone were to audit those systems first. Hypothetically speaking, if Nevlin hired an external firm to validate their data integrity before this big presentation, they'd find discrepancies, I finished. Serious ones, the kind that would trigger a full investigation. James pulled out a business card, not Ridgefire, another company entirely. Vanguard Security Audits. They're very thorough, very discreet, and they happen to be on Nevlin's approved vendor list. What a coincidence, I said, taking the card. Indeed. Robert stood, signaling the meeting's end. Emily, we can't officially hire you while you're under that non-compete, but we can offer you educational opportunities, research projects, academic consultations. Nothing that would violate your agreement, of course. Of course, I agreed. I'm just a clerk now. What would I know about security audits? As I drove back to Nevlin, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. VSA has been contracted for preliminary audit, starting Monday. J. I smiled, pulling into the parking garage. Troy wanted to play corporate games. He was about to learn that some players had been studying the board a lot longer than others. Back at desk 3B47, I found Bradley hovering nervously. Emily Troy wants all your notes from the last 2 weeks. He said you've been keeping detailed documentation. Of course, I said pleasantly, handing over a carefully edited folder. Everything's there: meeting notes, project summaries, his brilliant insights. I even included his comments about the previous security infrastructure being dinosaur tech built by dinosaurs. Bradley winced. He really said that. Page 47, third paragraph. I turned back to my computer. Will there be anything else? As Bradley scurried away with the folder, I allowed myself a small smile. Troy thought he'd won by reducing me to a note-taker. He had no idea those notes would be the very rope he'd hang himself with. Monday was coming. Vanguard security audits would arrive, and Troy Kendrick would finally discover what happened when you tried to steal from someone who'd turned documentation into an art form. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The peculiar thing about Ridgefire was that it didn't exist, at least not in any traditional sense. No corporate registration, no LinkedIn pages, no press releases. It was more of a collective, a quiet network of professionals who'd been chewed up by corporate machinery and had decided to build something different. We didn't have clients. We had research projects. We didn't offer services. We facilitated educational exchanges. My transition was seamless. Officially, I was Emily Barrett, technical compliance clerk at Nevlin Analytics, fetching coffee and formatting spreadsheets. Unofficially, I was conducting independent research on corporate governance structures for a series of white papers that Ridgefire would never publish. The beauty of the arrangement was its perfect legality. My non-compete prohibited me from working in technology, security, or consulting. It said nothing about academic research. It forbade me from breathing near servers in a professional capacity. But it couldn't stop me from writing theoretical papers about hypothetical security vulnerabilities that just happened to match certain real-world scenarios. My days fell into a rhythm, 8 to 5 at Nevlin, playing the broken executive reduced to clerical work, evenings at various coffee shops, meeting with other Ridgefire researchers to discuss our findings, weekends at the public library, writing papers that would never see publication, but would somehow find their way to very specific readers. It was during one of these library sessions that I met Dr. Elena Vasquez. She'd been chief data scientist at Harman Industries until she discovered her ML models were being used for purposes that violated both ethics and several federal regulations. Now she taught part-time at the community college and conducted independent research. "The Nevlin situation," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "James mentioned you might need someone who understands algorithmic auditing." I closed my laptop partially. "I'm just a clerk. I wouldn't know anything about that." She smiled. "Of course, but hypothetically, if someone were analyzing data export patterns from a major analytics firm, they might notice interesting anomalies, especially if that someone had experience with the specific algorithms Nevlin uses. Hypothetically, for instance," Elena continued, pulling out her tablet, "certain patterns might indicate someone was extracting data they believed was real but was actually synthetic. The mathematical signatures would be subtle, the kind of thing that would fool someone with an MBA, but not someone with a PhD in data science." She showed me a graph that meant nothing to most people, but told a very specific story to anyone who understood data architecture. Troy's exports weren't random. He was systematically downloading what he thought was Nevlin's crown jewels, preparing for something bigger than just a board presentation. "He's building a competing product," I said quietly. "The export pattern suggests someone is attempting to replicate Nevlin's entire analytical framework, the kind of thing you'd need if you were, say, planning to launch a startup that mysteriously had the exact same capabilities as your former employer. But the data is fake." "Convincingly fake," Elena corrected. "It would pass initial investor scrutiny, maybe even survive a few months of operation, but when real clients tried to use it for real decisions, catastrophic failure. The kind that triggers lawsuits, SEC investigations, and criminal fraud charges." She tucked her tablet away, hypothetically speaking. That evening, I received an encrypted message through channels that technically didn't exist. Vanguard Security Audits had begun their preliminary review at Nevlin. Their initial findings were concerning. They'd requested a full forensic audit of all systems Troy had accessed. I spent that night at my apartment, watching my tracking dashboard light up like a Christmas tree. Troy was panicking, trying to cover his tracks, not realizing that every deletion, every modification, every attempt to hide his activities was being logged by systems he didn't know existed. Monday morning at Nevlin was electric. Vanguard's team had set up in Conference Room A. The one with windows and department heads were being called in one by one. Troy strutted around the executive floor, assuring everyone this was routine, just crossing T's and dotting I's before his big presentation. I kept my head down at desk 3B47, typing meeting notes and pretending not to notice the increasing frequency of Troy's trips to the bathroom, the sweat stains spreading under his designer shirt, the way his confident smile was starting to crack at the edges. At 2:30 p.m., Bradley appeared at my desk, pale and trembling. "Emily, the auditors want to talk to you." "Me?" I put on my best confused face. "But I'm just a clerk. I don't have access to anything important." "They said it's about historical documentation. They need someone who understands the old systems." I followed Bradley to Conference Room A, where 3 Vanguard auditors sat surrounded by laptops and printouts. The lead auditor, a woman named Diane Marshall, looked up as I entered. "Ms. Barrett, thank you for joining us. We understand you were previously Director of Systems Security. Until about 3 weeks ago, yes. We're seeing some unusual patterns in the system logs. Specifically, large-scale data exports using credentials that don't match any official user accounts. Do you know anything about that?" I sat carefully, folding my hands. I wouldn't have any current information. My access was revoked when I transitioned to my new role. Of course, but these exports started before your transition. In fact, she pulled up a timeline. They began the day after someone accessed your office using override codes. Do you remember that? I reported that incident to HR, I said truthfully. I was told it was being investigated. Was it? Diane made a note. We haven't found any investigation records. What we have found is systematic access to systems using credentials that appear in a file that was copied from a device registered to you. Can you explain that? I could feel Troy's future crumbling with every word. During my time as director, I maintained various security testing environments, honeypots, fake systems with fake credentials designed to catch unauthorized access. If someone took those credentials thinking they were real, they'd be accessing synthetic data environments, Diane finished. Ms. Barrett, did you document these honeypot systems? Extensively. The documentation should be in the Security Protocols folder on the shared drive, Section 7.3, I believe. One of the other auditors was already pulling it up. Got it. Honeypot Architecture and Monitoring Systems. Last updated 3 years ago. Author E. Barrett. This is very thorough, Diane said, scanning the documentation. It lists every fake credential, every synthetic dataset, every tracking mechanism. If someone were using these credentials thinking they were accessing real data, they'd be stealing worthless information while creating a perfect evidence trail, I said quietly. Ms. Barrett, Diane leaned forward, who has access to your security devices? It maintains an inventory of all company equipment. Personal devices would require a warrant or direct physical access. And if someone accessed your office without authorization, that would be breaking and entering, wouldn't it? Or at least corporate espionage, depending on what was taken. Diane exchanged glances with her team. We'll need a formal statement from you, and we may have follow-up questions. Of course, though I should mention, I pulled out my phone, showing them my recording app. I've been documenting all meetings and conversations since my role transition. For my own protection, I hope that's not a problem. Not at all, Diane said with what might have been a smile. Thorough documentation is always appreciated. As I left the conference room, I passed Troy in the hallway. His face was the color of spoiled milk, his designer confidence evaporating like morning dew. He grabbed my arm as I passed. What did you tell them? He hissed. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. The truth? That I'm just a clerk who doesn't have access to anything important. Isn't that what you wanted? You set me up. Set you up. I gently removed his hand. Troy, I've been sitting at a desk in the basement filing your meeting notes. How could I set anyone up? I don't even have server access anymore. You made sure of that. His phone rang before he could respond. The display showed Marcus Nevlin, CEO and uncle. Troy's face went even paler as he answered. Uncle Marcus. Yes. I know. I can explain. The auditors are mistaken. I walked away, leaving him to explain to his uncle how he'd stolen fake data while creating enough evidence to destroy his own career. Back at my desk, I found an email from Ridgefire Research Project Update Meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Bring your notes. Jay. The meeting was at a private dining room in a downtown restaurant. James Morrison raised a glass as I entered. To Emily Barrett, who proved that sometimes the best security system is the one that lets intruders think they've won. It's not over yet, I said, taking my seat. Troy still has his uncle's protection. Not for long, Sarah Kim said, sliding a tablet across the table. Vanguard's preliminary report was leaked to the Wall Street Journal an hour ago. Something about a senior executive at Nevlin stealing proprietary data to start a competing firm. The article was devastating. It didn't name Troy directly. Legal wouldn't allow that yet, but it painted a picture of nepotism, corporate espionage, and gross incompetence that would make any board member nervous. Nevlin's stock was already down 3% in after-hours trading. How did the Journal get the report? I asked. Robert Carver smiled. Ridgefire doesn't leak, but we do know journalists who are very good at finding information that happens to be left in public places. Digital breadcrumbs, you might say. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your non-compete is void. Legal concurs. Welcome to Ridgefire. Patricia Wong. I stared at the message. Patricia. She's been consulting with us for 6 months, James explained. Ever since Marcus started installing family members in key positions, she knew this day would come. So what happens now? Now Elena Vasquez raised her own glass. Now you help us turn Ridgefire from a shadow network into something more, a firm that helps professionals protect themselves from corporate predators, a place where expertise matters more than connections. And Troy. By tomorrow morning, he'll be explaining to federal investigators why he tried to steal and monetize data from his own company. His uncle won't be able to protect him from wire fraud charges. Sarah's smile was sharp. Especially once they discover he's been shopping that stolen data to competitors. I thought about Troy's panicked face in the hallway, his designer suit soaked with fear sweat. His uncle's name no longer a shield, but a liability. 3 weeks ago, he'd thought he could take everything from me with a slammed palm and a threat. Instead, he'd walked into a trap 3 years in the making, built by someone who understood that, in the digital age, the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one with the most power, it's the one with the most patience. To Ridgefire, I said, raising my glass, and to teaching corporate predators that some prey have teeth. We drank, and I felt the last 3 weeks of humiliation wash away. I wasn't Emily Barrett, technical compliance clerk anymore. I was Emily Barrett, founding partner of Ridgefire Consulting. And we were just getting started. Tuesday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting. My personal phone started buzzing at 6:15 a.m. with calls from unknown numbers, blocked numbers, and eventually, Troy's personal cell. I let them all go to voicemail while I sipped coffee and reviewed the Wall Street Journal article on my tablet. The piece was surgical in its precision. No direct accusations. Just carefully presented facts on usual data access patterns at Nevlin Analytics, a senior executive under investigation, potential intellectual property theft. The journalist had even found Troy's LinkedIn, where he'd been bragging about launching a revolutionary fintech startup just 2 weeks after gaining his new position. By 7 a.m., the calls stopped. Instead, an email arrived from Troy's personal account. The subject line in all caps, "You think you've won." I opened it carefully, my phone already recording the screen. The email was a masterpiece of barely controlled rage. Emily, I know what you did. Those passwords. That data, it was all fake. You set me up. You think you're so clever with your little honeypot trap. But you've made a fatal mistake. I have recordings, conversations, evidence that you've been undermining Nevlin for years. You can still fix this. Meet me at Cafe Nero on 5th Street at 8 a.m. Come alone. We can work out a deal. Otherwise, I release everything. You have 1 hour. T. I smiled, forwarding the email to 3 different addresses: my lawyer, Patricia Wong, and Diane Marshall at Vanguard. Then I typed a simple response. Troy, I'm just a technical compliance clerk. I don't have the authority to make deals. Perhaps you should speak with Legal E. His response came within minutes. Stop playing games. I have a recording from our first meeting where you admitted to building backdoors into Nevlin's systems. Show up or I send it to the FBI. Interesting. He was claiming to have recorded our confrontation in Conference Room C, the one where he'd slammed the table and demanded my passwords. The problem with Troy's threat was simple. I'd been recording too. And my version included his threatening my job if I didn't hand over system access. Context, as they say, is everything. At 7:45 a.m., I walked into Cafe Nero, but I wasn't alone. Patricia Wong sat at a corner table with 2 companions, Diane Marshall from Vanguard, and a man I didn't recognize who had federal investigator written all over him. Troy arrived at exactly 8 a.m., his usual swagger replaced by something desperate and feral. He spotted me immediately but froze when he saw my companions. For a moment, I thought he might run. Then his face hardened, and he strode over like he still owned the room. This was supposed to be private, he hissed at me. You threatened to go to the FBI, Patricia said calmly. So we saved you the trouble. This is Special Agent David Park from the Computer Crime Division. He's very interested in your allegations. Troy's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cornered defiance. I want immunity. From what? Agent Park asked mildly. We haven't charged you with anything, yet. She set me up, Troy pointed at me. She created fake systems, fake data, fake passwords. She wanted me to take them. Is that so? Diane pulled out a folder. Because our forensic analysis shows you accessed Ms. Barrett's office using override codes that required C-suite authorization. You then removed a personal device from her locked drawer and copied its contents without permission. Can you explain that? I had authority. From whom? Patricia interrupted. There's no record of any authorized access. In fact, there's an email trail showing you asked it for those codes, claiming it was for a security review that was never scheduled. Troy's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. My uncle has already been briefed on the situation, Patricia continued. He's particularly interested in learning about this competing startup you've been planning, the one you've been shopping to Nevlin's competitors, using what you thought was proprietary data. That's not, Troy turned to me, his mask finally slipping completely. You did this. You ruined everything. I documented everything, I corrected quietly. There's a difference. Agent Park leaned forward. Mr. Kendrick, I suggest you stop talking and get a lawyer. We have evidence of unauthorized computer access, attempted theft of trade secrets, and wire fraud based on your communications with potential investors about data you knew to be synthetic. Knew to be... Troy's voice cracked. How could I know it was fake? Diane smiled coldly. Because Ms. Barrett's honeypot documentation has been in Nevlin's security protocols folder for 3 years. Any legitimate security review would have found it. The only reason to avoid checking would be if you knew your access was unauthorized. The trap was perfect. If Troy claimed he didn't know about the honeypots, he was admitting to negligence. If he claimed he did know, he was admitting to intentionally accessing fake systems, which meant he knew his actions were unauthorized from the start. I want a deal, Troy said finally. All pretense gone. I'll tell you everything, about the reorganization, about who else is involved, about the whole plan. The whole plan. Patricia's voice was dangerously quiet. Troy nodded frantically. It wasn't just me. There were others, board members, competitors. They wanted Nevlin's analytics capabilities distributed, broken up, sold off in pieces. I felt my stomach tighten. This was bigger than just Troy's ambition. Names, Agent Park said, pulling out a recorder. Start with names. As Troy began spilling everything a conspiracy that reached into Nevlin's board and several competing firms, I quietly excused myself. My part was done. The honeypot had caught more than just one arrogant nephew. It had exposed a network of corporate vultures circling Nevlin. Outside, my phone buzzed with a message from James Morrison. Monitoring the situation. This is bigger than expected. Ridgefire needs to scale up, ready to build something real. I stood on the sidewalk, watching through the cafe window as Troy gestured wildly. Patricia took notes, and Agent Park's expression grew increasingly grim. 3 weeks ago, Troy had thought he was untouchable, protected by his uncle's name and his own inflated ego. Now he was just another criminal trying to trade information for leniency. But there was no satisfaction in his downfall, only a cold recognition of patterns I'd seen too many times. Troy wasn't unique. He was symptomatic of a disease that infected too many corporations. Nepotism, greed, the belief that connections mattered more than competence or ethics. My phone rang, Marcus Nevlin's name on the display. Emily. His voice was tired, older than I'd ever heard it. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. Marcus, I documented a security breach. That's all. We both know it's more than that. You could have just walked away when Troy pushed you out. Instead, you protected Nevlin even after we failed to protect you. I protected the data, I corrected, and the people who depend on it. Patricia told me about Ridgefire, about what you're building. He paused. When this is over, when we've cleaned house, I want Nevlin to be your first major client. Full security audit, no restrictions, whatever access you need. That's generous, but it's not generosity. Emily, it's survival. Troy exposed vulnerabilities that go beyond technology. We need people like you, people who understand that real security isn't just about passwords and firewalls. It's about integrity. I thought about his offer. Ridgefire as a legitimate firm, with Nevlin as our flagship client. It would send a message to every other company that had chosen politics over competence. We'll discuss terms, I said finally, after the investigations are complete. Fair enough. And Emily, thank you for everything. I ended the call and walked back toward my car. The morning sun was bright, burning away the last of the spring fog. In the cafe, Troy was still talking, still trying to save himself by destroying others. But his words were just noise now, the desperate thrashing of someone who'd already lost. My phone buzzed again. Elena Vasquez. News travels fast in certain circles. I've got 3 former colleagues interested in joining Ridgefire, all of them pushed out by corporate politics, all of them brilliant. Coffee tomorrow. Then Sarah. My contact at the SEC says this is going to trigger reviews at 6 other firms. We're going to be busy. And finally, Robert, local news just picked up the story. Troy's LinkedIn is down. His startup website redirects to a 404 error, digital erasure in real time. I sat in my car for a moment, processing the flood of messages. Troy had threatened to release recordings, to go to the FBI, to destroy my career. Instead, he'd destroyed his own future and exposed a conspiracy that would reshape Nevlin's entire leadership structure. All because he'd been too arrogant to consider that a mere security director might be smarter than him, too entitled to recognize a trap when he walked right into it, too privileged to understand that competence couldn't be stolen, it had to be earned. I started the car and drove away from Cafe Nero. Leaving Troy to his confessions and consequences, there was work to do. Ridgefire needed structure, systems, protocols. We needed to be ready for the companies that would come calling once news of Troy's downfall spread. But first, I had one last task at Nevlin. I drove to the office and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, to desk 3B47 where I'd spent 3 weeks playing the broken executive. My few personal items were still there, a coffee mug, a stress ball, a small potted plant that had somehow survived the basement's fluorescent lighting. I packed them carefully, then left a single sheet of paper on the desk. My resignation, effective immediately. No 2 weeks' notice needed. Troy's conspiracy had voided all normal protocols. As I walked out, Bradley appeared from nowhere, looking even younger and more nervous than usual. Emily, I heard. Is it true about Troy? You should talk to HR, I said gently. They'll have official information. He made me do things, Bradley said quietly. Access files, change permissions. He said it was for the digital transformation, but I knew something was wrong. Did you document it? His face crumpled. No, I was scared. He said he'd have me fired if I didn't cooperate. I set down my box and pulled out my phone. What's your personal email? Bradley. He told me, confused. I sent him a link. That's a secure reporting system, I said. Document everything you remember, dates, times, specific requests. The investigators will want to know about any unauthorized access Troy ordered. Will I get in trouble? Not if you're honest about being coerced. Bradley, you're 23. Troy was a senior executive who threatened your job. That's textbook workplace intimidation. His eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you. I thank you. I picked up my box again. Document everything. Tell the truth. And Bradley. Next time someone asks you to violate security protocols, remember that no job is worth your integrity. I left him standing there, phone already out, typing furiously. Another small victory in what was becoming a larger war against corporate corruption. As I drove away from Nevlin for what I thought would be the last time, My phone lit up with messages from journalists, recruiters, and colleagues who'd heard the news. Troy's downfall was sending ripples through the tech community. But I ignored them all except one, a text from an unknown number that simply said, "The champagne is on ice. Welcome to the real Ridgefire, the partners." I smiled, accelerating onto the highway. Troy had thought he was playing corporate chess, moving pieces around a board he controlled. He never realized I wasn't playing chess at all. I was playing Go, and I'd been placing stones for 3 years. The beauty of a non-compete clause is that it's only as strong as its weakest definition. Troy and HR had been so eager to lock me out of the technology sector. They'd painted themselves into a corner with language so broad it became meaningless. Technical compliance clerk bore no resemblance to director of system security, different pay grade, different responsibilities, different everything. Clarissa Wexley's law office occupied the top floor of a boutique building downtown, all glass and steel with views of the city skyline. She was waiting for me in her conference room, documents already spread across the mahogany table like battle plans. "Emily," she stood, her handshake firm and brief. "I've been expecting you. Patricia Wong sent over the employment contracts an hour ago." Clarissa Wexley was a legend in employment law circles, 5'2" in heels. With silver hair she wore like armor and a voice that could slice through corporate doublespeak like a laser. She'd made her reputation dismantling non-competes for executives who'd been pushed out by corporate politics, and she'd never lost a case. "The non-compete is garbage," she said without preamble, sliding a highlighted copy across the table. "They demoted you from director to clerk, a 70% reduction in responsibilities. Look at this clause here." I read where she pointed, "The non-compete agreement shall remain in effect only if the employee's final position maintains substantial similarity to their original role, defined as no less than 70% overlap in core job functions." "They wrote their own escape hatch," I said. "Better. They put it in writing that your new role was completely different. Technical compliance clerk has zero overlap with director of system security. They even helpfully documented that you no longer had system access, security responsibilities, or technical duties." Clarissa smiled, and it was sharp enough to draw blood. "In their eagerness to humiliate you, they legally freed you. So I can work anywhere. You can do anything except the specific duties of a technical compliance clerk at Nevlin Analytics, which, according to their own job description, consists of filing, note-taking, and administrative support. Somehow, I don't think that'll limit your career options." She pulled out another document. "But we're not just playing defense here. Patricia mentioned Ridgefire's incorporating as a legitimate consultancy. We're considering it." "Don't consider. Do it. I've already drawn up the papers. You, James Morrison, Sarah Kim, Robert Carver, and Elena Vasquez as founding partners. I'll handle the legal structure pro bono." "Why pro bono?" Clarissa's expression softened slightly. "Because 15 years ago, I was general counsel at a Fortune 500 company. The CEO's son decided he wanted my job. The parallels to your situation are striking. Let's just say I have a personal interest in ensuring people like Troy don't win." Over the next 2 hours, we built Ridgefire from the ground up. Not just a consulting firm, but a new model a company owned equally by its partners, with bylaws that prevented any single person from accumulating too much power. Every major decision would require a majority vote. No nepotism, no political appointments, no backdoor deals. "There's one more thing," Clarissa said as we finished. "Troy's threats about releasing recordings empty. Any recordings he made without consent are inadmissible and potentially criminal under state wiretapping laws. But your recordings made openly and with notice are completely legal." He seemed very confident about having evidence. Desperate people often confuse volume with validity. Speaking of which, she pulled up her tablet. "The news cycle is accelerating. 3 board members have already resigned from Nevlin. The SEC has opened a formal investigation, and Troy's little startup, his investors are suing him for fraud." She showed me the headlines. "Nevlin Analytics in Crisis. Board members resign amid data theft scandal. Failed startup founder faces federal charges. But here's the interesting part, Clarissa continued, pulling up another document. This email was sent to my office an hour ago, from Troy. The email was a masterpiece of delusion. Troy claimed he was being framed, that I'd orchestrated everything, that he had proof of my conspiracy to destroy Nevlin. He demanded a meeting to discuss mutual resolution and hinted at information that could destroy Emily Barrett's credibility forever. He's still trying to negotiate, I said, almost impressed by his persistence. From federal custody, Clarissa noted, he was arrested this morning, but he posted bail Uncle's money, presumably, and immediately started sending these emails to anyone he thinks might listen. Should I be concerned? About a desperate man with no cards left to play, no. But we should document his harassment. It'll be useful if he escalates. As if on cue. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker. Emily, this is Troy. We need to talk, face to face. No lawyers, no FBI, just us. I know things about Nevlin that you need to hear, about your precious security protocols, about what really happened 3 years ago. Meet me tonight at Warehouse 47 on the docks, 8 p.m. Come alone or... I stopped the message. Warehouse 47. Clarissa was already typing. Abandoned building scheduled for demolition. Interesting choice for someone claiming to negotiate in good faith. He's lost it completely. Or he's trying to create a situation where he can claim self-defense. Either way, you're not going anywhere near that warehouse. She picked up her phone. I'm forwarding this to Agent Park and filing for a restraining order. But I was thinking about his words. 3 years ago. What had happened 3 years ago? That was when I'd built the honeypot system, after the incident with the previous executive's nephew. But Troy couldn't know about that, unless... Clarissa, I need to make a call. I stepped out onto her office's balcony and dialed Patricia Wong. Emily, she answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. We found something in Troy's emails. References to someone called the Mentor. Ring any bells? My blood chilled. No? Who is it? We're not sure yet, but Troy's been corresponding with them for months, getting advice on how to access systems, how to frame the data theft, how to discredit you specifically. This wasn't just Troy's plan, someone was guiding him. Someone who knew about the honeypots. That's our concern, Emily. Is there anyone from 3 years ago who might hold a grudge? Anyone who knew about your security measures? 3 years ago, the incident that had inspired me to build the honeypot system in the first place. Marcus's previous nephew, Daniel Nevlin, who'd tried to sell client data to competitors. He'd been caught, fired, and last I'd heard, had left the country to avoid prosecution. Daniel Nevlin, I said quietly. Marcus's other nephew, the one who blamed you for his downfall, Patricia finished. We'll look into it. In the meantime, don't go anywhere alone. If Daniel's back and working with Troy... I ended the call and returned to Clarissa's office. The champagne celebration with Ridgefire would have to wait. Troy wasn't just a lone nepotism hire trying to steal data. He was part of something larger, guided by someone who'd been planning revenge for 3 years. Change of plans, I told Clarissa. We need to assume Troy has a partner, someone with inside knowledge. Clarissa's expression hardened. Then we expand our defensive position. I'll file for emergency protective orders, notify building security at your apartment, and coordinate with federal investigators. She stood, all 5 feet 2 inches, radiating dangerous competence. They want to escalate. Let them try. I've been waiting 15 years to destroy people like them. As I left her office, my phone buzzed with messages from the other Ridgefire partners. James had heard about the warehouse meeting through his contacts. Sarah was already analyzing Troy's communication patterns for evidence of his mentor. Robert was coordinating with his media contacts to ensure any attempt at a smear campaign would backfire spectacularly. But it was Elena's message that made me smile. Ran analysis on Troy's data exports. His revolutionary startup was just planning to repackage Nevlin's algorithms. With fake data, the lawsuits will be legendary. Troy thought he had leverage with his mysterious knowledge about 3 years ago. He thought his mentor, whoever they were, had given him the keys to destroy me. But they'd both made the same mistake. They assumed I was playing defense. I pulled up my encrypted messaging app and sent a single message to all Ridgefire partners. War Council tonight, my apartment. Bring everything on Daniel Nevlin. If they wanted to drag the past into this, they'd learn why I'd spent 3 years preparing for exactly this scenario. The honeypots hadn't just been about catching unauthorized access. They'd been about creating a perfect record of everyone who'd ever tried to compromise Nevlin's systems, including Daniel Nevlin's attempts from 3 years ago, attempts I'd documented, archived, and stored in places Troy's mentor couldn't even dream of accessing. The game was expanding, but so was my arsenal. And unlike Troy and his shadow advisor, I'd learned long ago that in corporate warfare, the best defense wasn't just documentation. It was mutually assured destruction, with better lawyers. My apartment had become a war room. Every flat surface was covered with documents, laptops, and the detritus of intense investigation. The Ridgefire partners had arrived within minutes of each other, each bringing pieces of a puzzle that was finally taking shape. Robert had printed every email Troy had sent in the last 6 months, highlighting patterns and connections. Sarah's laptop showed communication analysis graphs that looked like spiderwebs of deception. Elena had financial records tracking mysterious payments into Troy's accounts. James brought coffee and 15 years of experience reading between corporate lines. But it was the unmarked drive I pulled from my safe that made everyone lean forward. 3 years ago, I began, Daniel Nevlin tried to sell Nevlin Analytics client list to Torrent Financial. I caught him because he was sloppy, used his corporate credentials, left digital fingerprints everywhere. Marcus fired him, threatened prosecution, and Daniel fled to Singapore to avoid charges. I plugged in the drive. What I didn't report at the time was that Daniel had help. Someone inside Torrent who was feeding him information about what data would be most valuable. I tracked their communications for months, building a profile. The screen filled with encrypted chat logs, financial transfers, and metadata I'd painstakingly collected. The insider called themselves Architect. They guided Daniel step by step, but when he got caught, Architect vanished, until now. Sarah pulled up her analysis. The language patterns in Troy's emails shift whenever he mentions strategic planning. It's subtle, but there's a second voice there, someone editing his messages, adding sophistication he doesn't naturally possess. Architect, Elena said. Has to be. The same person who guided Daniel is now guiding Troy. But why? James set down his coffee. Why risk exposure after 3 years of staying hidden? I opened another file. Because of what I found in the just-in-case folder, not the fake data Troy stole, the real intelligence I'd gathered. 3 years of tracking irregular trades that preceded every major Nevlin announcement. Someone has been insider trading using our data, and they needed to destroy evidence before the SEC investigation went too deep. The room went silent. This wasn't just about Troy's petty ambition or Daniel's revenge. This was about someone who'd been bleeding Nevlin for years, using family drama as cover for systematic financial crimes. My phone buzzed. Patricia Wong. Found something. Meet me at Nevlin. Bring your evidence. Trust no one else. I showed the message to the group. James frowned. Could be a trap. Troy's still out on bail. Patricia's been with Nevlin for 15 years, I countered. If she's compromised, we're all finished anyway. Then we all go, Robert said. Ridgefire protects its own. 40 minutes later, we walked into Nevlin Analytics as a unit. The security guard's eyes widened. He'd clearly been briefed on the situation, but Patricia had left our names at the desk. The executive floor was nearly empty at 8:30 p.m., just cleaning staff and the ghosts of corporate ambition. Patricia was waiting in the CEO's conference room, but she wasn't alone. Marcus Nevlin sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past week. Beside him sat someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an FBI windbreaker. "Emily," Marcus stood. "Thank you for coming. This is Special Agent Director Catherine Walsh. She's leading the investigation into the insider trading ring." "Ring?" I kept my voice steady, but my pulse accelerated. Agent Walsh gestured for us to sit. "We've been investigating suspicious trading patterns around Nevlin Analytics for 18 months. Your honeypot operation accidentally captured evidence of something much larger than data theft. Troy Kendrick was a pawn, but his arrest led us to financial records that connect to a dozen other companies." She pulled up a presentation. Names, dates, trades that netted millions in profits, all traced back to information that could only have come from inside Nevlin and its competitors. "The person Troy calls the mentor isn't Daniel Nevlin," Walsh continued. "Daniel was another pawn, used and discarded. The real architect of this scheme has been hiding in plain sight." Marcus's face was stone. "Tell them who it is." "Catherine." "Richard Holbrook, your CFO." The room temperature seemed to drop. Richard Holbrook had been with Nevlin since its founding, trusted with every financial secret, every strategic plan. The perfect position to orchestrate insider trading while using the Nevlin nephews as convenient scapegoats. "He knew Troy would fail," I said, understanding flooding through me. "He counted on it. Troy's spectacular implosion would destroy any evidence trail leading back to the real crimes." "Exactly," Walsh nodded. "Except you documented everything. Your honeypot didn't just catch Troy, it preserved evidence Holbrook thought would be destroyed in the chaos. He's been trying to get that evidence for weeks." Patricia pulled out her phone, showing a text. "Conference room A, now. Bring the Ridgefire team. RH." "He's here," she said quietly. "In the building. He must have been monitoring our communications." "Perfect," Walsh smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "He's walking into his own trap, Ms. Barrett. I understand you have the original evidence files." I held up the drive. "Everything. 3 years of documentation." "Outstanding. Now, here's what we're going to do." 10 minutes later, we walked into conference room A to find Richard Holbrook sitting calmly at the table. Troy beside him looking pale and twitchy. Holbrook was everything Troy wanted to be polished. Confident, radiating authority. 60 years old with silver hair and a suit worth more than most cars. "Emily," Holbrook smiled warmly, "and the famous Ridgefire partners. Please, sit. We have much to discuss." I remained standing. "Richard, I should have known." "Should you?" "I've been protecting Nevlin for 20 years. Sometimes that protection requires difficult decisions." He gestured to Troy. "My nephew here made some unfortunate choices. But family is family. I'm sure you understand." "Nephew." Another piece clicked into place. Not Daniel's mentor, Troy's actual uncle. The connection that had gotten Troy hired in the first place. "You used Marcus's nephew 3 years ago, and when that failed, you used your own," Sarah said coldly. "How many more family members were you planning to sacrifice?" Holbrook's smile never wavered. "Troy's mistakes are his own, but they've created an unfortunate situation. Federal investigations, media attention, stock price volatility. It all needs to be contained." "Contained," I repeated. "Is that what this is about?" "I'm offering a solution. Ridgefire gets a lucrative contract with Nevlin Say, 5 years guaranteed at premium rates. Troy takes full responsibility for the data theft, receives a suspended sentence, and disappears quietly. The investigation ends. Finding no evidence of wider corruption, everyone wins. Except for the people you've been stealing from for years," Robert said. For the first time, Holbrook's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." I set the drive on the table. 18 months of insider trading, every transaction tracked, every profit documented. You didn't just use family connections to cover your crimes, you destroyed careers to protect your scheme. "That drive contains stolen data," Holbrook said smoothly. "Inadmissible in court. Obtained through unauthorized access. No prosecutor would touch it." "Good thing I'm not a prosecutor," Agent Walsh said, entering the room with a full FBI team. "Richard Holbrook, You're under arrest for insider trading, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. Holbrook's composure finally cracked. He turned to Troy, who shrank back. You led them here, you stupid boy. You've ruined everything. I didn't, Uncle Richard, I swear. He didn't betray you, I said quietly. You betrayed yourself. Every email you sent Troy, every instruction, every piece of guidance you sent it from your corporate account, through Nevlin's servers, which I've been monitoring since you tried to use Daniel 3 years ago. The FBI agents moved in, cuffs clicking around Holbrook's wrists. He stared at me with naked hatred. You think you've won? You have no idea how deep this goes. How many people are involved? They'll destroy you. They can try, I said. But I'll be ready. I've been preparing for 3 years, remember. As they led him out, Troy collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I didn't know. He said he was helping me, said I deserved better than what Marcus gave me. I didn't know about the trading, about any of it. That's for the courts to decide, Walsh said, not unkindly. Your cooperation tonight will be noted, but Troy, next time someone offers you a shortcut to success, remember where it led you. Marcus appeared in the doorway, Patricia beside him. His eyes were hollow, devastated by his CFO's betrayal. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years of friendship, and he was stealing from us the entire time. He was stealing from everyone, I corrected. Nevlin, its clients, its shareholders, using your family as cover, creating chaos to hide his crimes. Marcus nodded slowly, then straightened. Patricia, draft a press release, full transparency about the investigation, and Emily, he met my eyes. That offer stands. Ridgefire has Nevlin's business for as long as you want it. We need people we can trust. I looked at my partners. James nodded slightly. Sarah smiled. Robert and Elena were already discussing implementation strategies. We'll need full access, I said. Every system, every process, every shadow IT solution someone might have hidden. If we're going to secure Nevlin, we do it right. Whatever you need, Marcus agreed. Just help us rebuild, help us be better. As we left the conference room, Agent Walsh pulled me aside. The drive, Ms. Barrett, the real one. I'll need it for evidence. I handed it over without hesitation. There are copies in my secure storage, encrypted, time-stamped, legally obtained. I learned long ago that evidence is only as good as its chain of custody. You'd have made a good federal agent, Walsh said with something like admiration. Ever consider a career change? Thanks, but I've found my calling, protecting companies from themselves, one documentation trail at a time. Walking out of Nevlin with my partners, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Troy was broken but not destroyed. He'd learn from this, or he wouldn't. Holbrook would spend years in federal prison. His carefully constructed empire crumbled to dust, and Daniel Nevlin, wherever he was hiding, would read about his mentor's fall and realize his part in the scheme was over. So, James said as we reached our cars, we're really doing this Ridgefire as a legitimate company. Why not? Elena grinned. We've already got our first major client, a reputation for catching corporate predators, and the best origin story in tech. Plus, Sarah added, we've got Emily's paranoid documentation habits. That's worth its weight in gold. Not paranoid, I protested. Prepared. Same thing, Robert laughed, but it saved us all. So here's to paranoid preparation. We made plans to meet tomorrow, to formally incorporate Ridgefire and begin the real work of building something new, something better, something that would stand as a warning to every corporate predator who thought family connections or political power could protect them from consequences. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with one last message. Unknown number, but I recognized the writing style. Congratulations, architect, your trap was perfect. D.N. Daniel Nevlin, watching from whatever shadow he'd found to hide in. I deleted the message without responding. He was yesterday's problem, a ghost of corporate malfeasance past, I had bigger things to focus on now. Ridgefire was rising from the ashes of corporate betrayal, and we were just getting started. The discovery phase of a federal investigation is like watching a slow-motion avalanche. It starts with a single stone in this case, Troy's arrest, and builds into something that buries everything in its path. Richard Holbrook's financial empire crumbled document by document, revelation by revelation, each new piece of evidence more damning than the last. I spent most of Thursday in the federal building downtown, walking Agent Walsh's team through the intricacies of my 3-year documentation project. The conference room looked like a paper hurricane had hit it, bankers' boxes stacked to the ceiling, laptops running decryption protocols, printers spewing out transaction logs that stretched back years. This timestamp here, I pointed to a highlighted section, shows Holbrook accessing the quarterly earnings report 48 hours before official release. And here, I pulled up another screen, is the corresponding trade through his shell company in the Caymans. He netted $2.7 million on that single transaction. Agent Walsh's team was thorough, professional, and absolutely ruthless. They'd frozen Holbrook's accounts within hours of his arrest, but the investigation revealed he'd been spreading his stolen gains across dozens of offshore entities. Conservative estimate, $40 million in illegal profits over 5 years. "We need to talk about Daniel Nevlin," Walsh said during a break. "His message to you yesterday, we traced it to a server in Malaysia. He's been monitoring the situation." "Is he a threat?" "Unknown, but he's definitely involved in Holbrook's network. We found payments from Holbrook's shells to accounts we believe Daniel controls. He wasn't just a pawn, he was a junior partner who got burned and ran." My phone buzzed. "Clarissa Wexley. Holbrook's lawyers are making noise about entrapment. Need your testimony ASAP. Bring everything." The federal courthouse was a different kind of battlefield. Holbrook had hired Brennan, Kowalski and Associates, the kind of firm that advertised on billboards about getting executives reduced sentences. They came out swinging, claiming I'd orchestrated an elaborate frame job to eliminate competition for my new consulting firm. Clarissa destroyed them in 40 minutes. "Your client," she said, voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "accessed Ms. Barrett's personal devices without authorization. He conspired with Troy Kendrick to steal what he believed was proprietary data. He then attempted to bribe federal witnesses to suppress evidence. At what point in this criminal conspiracy was my client supposed to have entrapped him?" Holbrook's lead attorney, Martin Brennan, tried to recover. "The so-called evidence was obtained through deceptive means. Ms. Barrett created fake systems specifically to protect Nevlin Analytics from insider threats," Clarissa interrupted. "Which is literally what she was hired to do. Are you arguing that security measures are entrapment? Should we remove all security cameras because they might catch criminals?" Judge Harrison, a 70-year veteran of corporate crime cases, was having none of it. "Mr. Brennan, your client had authorization to access Nevlin's financial systems. He did not have authorization to use that access for insider trading. Ms. Barrett's security measures, however creative, don't change that fundamental fact." But Brennan had one more card. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of Ms. Barrett's bias. She was terminated from her position. Demoted," I corrected from the witness stand, "to technical compliance clerk, a position that mysteriously violated the terms of the non-compete I was forced to sign, effectively invalidating it. Regardless," Brennan continued, "she had motive to what?" Clarissa stood. "To force Holbrook to steal $40 million over 5 years, to make him use his nephew as a corporate spy, to compel him to commit wire fraud across state lines. Your Honor, this is desperation masquerading as defense." The judge agreed. Holbrook's motion to dismiss was denied. The criminal trial would proceed, and based on the U.S. attorney's smile, Holbrook was looking at 20 years minimum. Outside the courthouse, Troy was waiting. He looked smaller somehow, his designer swagger replaced by something hollow and uncertain. His lawyer, a public defender who looked barely older than him, stood nervously at his side. "Emily," Troy started, then stopped. swallowed, tried again. I'm testifying. Against Uncle Richard. Against all of it. I studied him. Gone was the arrogance, the entitled certainty that the world owed him success. In its place was someone who'd finally understood the price of shortcuts. Why tell me? Because I owe you an apology, a real one. He met my eyes. I thought I was smart, thought I deserved to run things because of my name, my connections. I never thought about who I was hurting, about what I was destroying. His lawyer touched his arm. Mr. Kendrick, we should go. Troy nodded but didn't move. The FBI offered me a deal, full cooperation for probation instead of prison. I'm taking it, and after all this is over, I'm leaving tech. My dad owns a restaurant in Ohio. I'm going to bus tables until I figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be something I'm not. It wasn't forgiveness he was asking for, we both knew that. It was acknowledgement, recognition that somewhere under the entitlement and ambition, there might be a person worth salvaging. Good luck, Troy, I said simply. Make it count. He walked away, shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived. His lawyer followed, already discussing testimony schedules. Troy Kendrick, former head of digital growth, future busboy. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone live with their choices. The War Council that night was different. We met at Ridgefire's new offices, a modest suite in a building filled with startups and small consultancies. James had signed the lease that morning. Sarah had already set up our security infrastructure. Elena was designing our data analysis protocols. Robert was fielding calls from journalists wanting the inside story. Holbrook's going away, I reported. 20 years if Walsh's team does their job. More if they connect him to the broader network. Speaking of which, Sarah pulled up her laptop. I've been analyzing the trading patterns. Holbrook wasn't working alone. There's a whole ecosystem here, executives at 12 different companies, all sharing insider information, all profiting from market manipulation. The FBI knows, I said. Walsh mentioned they're expanding the investigation. Holbrook was just the thread they needed to unravel the whole sweater. And we're the ones who handed them the thread. Robert grinned. Hell of a launch for a new company. Ridgefire, we catch corporate conspiracies before coffee. Elena was more practical. We need to be ready for backlash. Holbrook has friends, allies, people who profited from his schemes. They won't appreciate us exposing their golden goose. She was right. Over the next week, Ridgefire faced a coordinated whisper campaign, anonymous rumors about our questionable methods, suggestions that we were corporate vigilantes who couldn't be trusted. 3 potential clients suddenly decided they weren't ready to move forward. We responded with radical transparency. Sarah created a public dashboard showing our methodology, no secrets, no hidden techniques, just solid security practices and meticulous documentation. James leveraged his network to get us featured in TechCrunch, How Ridgefire is Revolutionizing Corporate Security Through Radical Transparency. The turning point came when Samantha Morrison, CEO of Apex Financial, called personally. Ms. Barrett, we've been following the Nevlin situation. We need a security audit, and we need someone we can trust. Someone who won't be bought or intimidated. We're not cheap, I warned. Good. Cheap security is expensive litigation. When can you start? By the end of the month, Ridgefire had 7 clients, 12 employees, and a reputation for being incorruptible. We'd turned down 3 offers that came with special considerations, backdoors, blind spots, the kind of security theater that enabled people like Holbrook. The last document in the Holbrook investigation arrived on a Tuesday morning. Agent Walsh delivered it personally to our offices, along with something I hadn't expected: Daniel Nevlin's immunity agreement. He turned himself in last week, Walsh explained. Flew in from Singapore with hard drives full of evidence. Apparently, watching Holbrook fall scared him enough to flip completely. I read through the agreement. Daniel would testify about the entire network names, dates, methods. In exchange, 5 years probation and a lifetime ban from the financial sector. He asked me to give you this. Walsh handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You were right to build the traps. I was too arrogant to see them. Holbrook promised me everything and delivered only exile. I'm done running. Maybe Troy and I can compare notes on redemption. Thank you for keeping better records than I deserved. D.N. I filed it with all the other documentation. Evidence of hubris, redemption. The price of believing shortcuts exist in systems built on trust. Marcus called that afternoon. Nevlin's stock had recovered. Stronger than before, the board had implemented every recommendation from our security audit. Trust, slowly rebuilt through transparency and better practices. You saved my company, he said simply. No, I documented its vulnerabilities. You saved it by facing them honestly. That night, the 5 founding partners of Ridgefire stood on the roof of our building, looking out over the city lights. Each pinprick of light represented a company, and within each company, the potential for another Holbrook, another Troy, another conspiracy built on ego and greed. Think we'll run out of work? Robert asked. Not as long as people think they're smarter than the systems designed to catch them, I replied. To job security through other people's insecurity. James raised his beer. We toasted, 5 professionals who'd been burned by corporate politics and emerged to build something better. Not perfect perfection was a lie sold by consultants who'd never faced real adversity, but honest, transparent, unbreakable. My phone buzzed one last time, an unknown number, but this time I recognized the area code, the federal detention center where Holbrook was being held pending trial. I didn't answer. Richard Holbrook had nothing to say that I needed to hear. His empire was dust, his reputation destroyed, his freedom forfeit to decades of greed. The real victory wasn't in his fall, it was in what rose from the ashes: Ridgefire, Nevlin's reformed practices, Troy's humility, Daniel's cooperation, even Marcus's newfound commitment to transparency. I thought about Troy's message on that first Monday, when he'd slammed his palm on my desk and demanded my passwords. He'd thought he was taking control, but he'd really been handing it to me. Every crime needs a witness, and I'd made sure to be the most thorough witness in corporate history. Ready to do it all again tomorrow? Elena asked. I smiled, looking out at the city full of secrets waiting to be documented. Always. Someone out there is planning to be clever. Let's make sure we're ready to be smarter. We headed back inside, to the servers humming with security protocols and the databases filling with careful documentation. Ridgefire was more than a company now, it was a promise, a warning. Try to steal from us. Try to corrupt our systems. Try to use power and privilege to escape consequences. We'll be waiting, and we'll be recording everything. The trial of Richard Holbrook began on a gray Thursday morning in November. The federal courthouse was surrounded by media trucks, their satellite dishes reaching toward the overcast sky like mechanical flowers seeking sun that wasn't there. I arrived at 6:45 a.m., 2 hours before I was scheduled to testify, needing time to center myself for what was coming. Clarissa met me in the witness preparation room, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her expression. The defense is going to come at you hard. They've brought in Alexandra Morse from Chicago. She specializes in discrediting technical witnesses. I knew the name. Alexandra Morse had gotten 3 CEOs acquitted of insider trading by convincing juries that the evidence was too complex to trust. She turned technical precision into reasonable doubt, made expertise look like obfuscation. Let her try, I said. I've got 3 years of documentation, every timestamp, every log entry, every piece of evidence cross-referenced and verified. That's what worries me, Clarissa said. Juries don't trust perfection. They trust humanity. Don't be a machine up there. Emily, be a person who happened to keep very good notes. The courtroom was packed. Holbrook sat at the defense table in a gray suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his expression carved from stone. Troy was in the gallery, scheduled to testify after me. He looked pale but determined, his cheap suit a stark contrast to his uncle's finery. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos led me through the foundation questions: my background, my role at Nevlin, the security measures I'd implemented. Then came the meat of it. Ms. Barrett, can you explain what first aroused your suspicions about insider trading at Nevlin? I took a breath, remembering Clarissa's advice, human, not machine. It started with patterns, little things that didn't quite fit, trades that happened just before announcements, always just under the reporting thresholds, the kind of patterns that scream insider knowledge if you know how to look. And you documented these patterns. Everything, I gestured to the evidence table, where my drives sat in clear custody bags. 3 years of logs, analyses, cross-references. I have a habit of writing everything down. My colleagues used to joke that I documented my documentation. A few jurors smiled. Good. Humanity creeping through the technical precision. Santos walked me through the evidence piece by piece. The honeypot system, Holbrook's access patterns, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, each element building on the last, creating a picture so clear even the most technical averse juror could follow it. Then came the cross-examination. Alexandra Morse approached like a predator who'd spotted weakness. Ms. Barrett, you were demoted from your position as Director of System Security, correct? I was reassigned to Technical Compliance Clerk, yes. After refusing to cooperate with company initiatives, after refusing to hand over system passwords to someone without proper authorization, that someone being Troy Kendrick, who had full support from senior management. Support isn't authorization. We have protocols for a reason. Morse smiled, like she'd won something. Protocols you designed. Protocols designed to prevent exactly what happened: unauthorized access to sensitive systems. Systems you admit you filled with fake data. Here it came. The attempt to make security measures look like entrapment. Honeypot systems are standard security practice, like having a safe with fake money to catch thieves. The real data was always protected. But you didn't tell anyone about these honeypots. They were fully documented in our security protocols. Section 7.3 available to anyone with legitimate access to security documentation, which Mr. Holbrook wouldn't have had. I met her eyes. The CFO had access to financial systems, not security architecture, that separation of duties, basic corporate governance. Morse tried another angle. You hold a grudge against Mr. Holbrook. I hold a grudge against anyone who steals $40 million through insider trading. Allegedly steals. The transactions are documented, the profits are traced, the offshore accounts are confirmed. At what point does allegedly become obviously? Judge Harrison intervened. Ms. Morse, please restrict yourself to questions. But Morse wasn't done. She pulled up my employment contract. You signed a non-compete agreement, didn't you? Which became invalid when I was reassigned to a position with completely different responsibilities. So you immediately started a competing firm. I started a security consulting firm after my non-compete was legally voided. Unless you're suggesting that taking notes and filing reports, my only duties as a clerk, constitute competition with a major analytics company. The questions went on for 2 hours. Morse tried every angle, suggesting I'd planted evidence, that I'd conspired with Troy, that I'd orchestrated everything to launch Ridgefire. Each time, I responded with documentation, timestamps that proved I couldn't have planted anything, logs showing Troy accessed systems on his own, evidence that Ridgefire didn't exist until after Holbrook's arrest. Ms. Barrett, Morse finally asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Are you always this paranoid? I prefer prepared. And yes, I document everything. It's saved my career twice now. When I stepped down, I passed Troy heading to the witness stand. He met my eyes, nodded slightly. His testimony was brutal in its honesty. He detailed every instruction from Holbrook, every promise made, every law broken in pursuit of power he hadn't earned. He told me I deserved better than working my way up, Troy said quietly. That family meant taking what was ours. I believed him because I wanted to believe I was special. I wasn't. I was just convenient. The trial lasted 2 weeks, witness after witness, document after document. The case against Holbrook, built like a fortress of fact. Daniel Nevlin testified via video link from federal custody, detailing the birth of the insider trading network, Other executives were named, their own trials pending. Holbrook never testified. He sat at the defense table like a statue, watching his empire crumble transaction by transaction. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The sentence would come later, but the forfeitures were immediate $40 million in illegal profits. The houses, the cars, the art collection built on stolen information. Outside the courthouse, the media descended. I pushed through them, offering no comment. This wasn't my victory lap. It was just the conclusion of 3 years of careful documentation. Troy caught up with me at my car. "Emily, wait." I turned. He looked different, older, humbled, real in a way he'd never been before. "Thank you," he said simply, "for documenting everything, for being prepared. If you hadn't, I'd probably be facing 20 years right now, or worse. I'd have gotten away with it and become just like him." "What's next for you?" "Community service for 6 months, then probation. Dad's restaurant is waiting." He almost smiled. "Turns out I'm pretty good at washing dishes. Honest work. Who knew?" "Take care, Troy." "You too. And Emily, that paranoid documentation thing, don't ever change it. The world needs people who keep receipts." I drove back to Ridgefire's offices, where my partners were waiting with champagne and new client contracts. The Holbrook trial had made us famous in corporate security circles. Companies wanted what we offered: protection through transparency, security through documentation. To Emily Barrett, James raised his glass, who proved that the pen really is mightier than the sword, especially when that pen documents everything in triplicate. To all of us, I countered, for building something better from the ashes of something broken. We drank, we planned, we prepared for the future. Because Richard Holbrook wasn't unique, he was just the one who got caught. Somewhere out there, another executive was skimming data. Another nephew was getting ideas above his station. Another conspiracy was forming in the shadows of corporate ambition. My phone buzzed, a notification from our monitoring systems. Unusual access patterns at a client site. Elevated privileges used after hours. Downloads that didn't match any scheduled processes. I smiled, pulling up the logs. Someone was being clever again. Someone thought they'd found a way around our security measures. Believed they were smarter than our systems. They were wrong. They were always wrong. Because I documented everything, every access, every download, every clever attempt to beat the system. It was all there in the logs, waiting to tell its story when the time came. "New case?" Sarah asked, seeing my expression. "Potentially. Someone at Vertex Financial is accessing systems they shouldn't." "Want me to start the analysis?" "Already started." I turned my laptop screen toward her. "Look at these patterns. Classic insider threat behavior. They're building up to something big." Elena laughed. "Not even a day after Holbrook's conviction, and they're already trying. Some people never learn." "That's job security," Robert said. "As long as there are people who think they're above the rules, we'll have work." I turned back to the logs, watching the story unfold in timestamps and access records. Another executive about to learn that, in the digital age, every crime leaves a trail. Every theft creates evidence. Every clever plan leaves fingerprints in the data. The would-be thief at Vertex Financial had no idea they were already caught. The trap wasn't even set. It was just the nature of digital systems to remember everything. All I had to do was pay attention, document the patterns, and wait for them to complete their own destruction. 3 years ago, Troy Kendrick had slammed his palm on my desk and demanded my passwords. He'd thought he was taking control. Instead, he'd started a chain of events that brought down a $40 million conspiracy and launched a new kind of security firm. Now Ridgefire stood as proof that documentation could defeat deception, that patience could outlast privilege, that careful preparation could bring down anyone who thought they were untouchable. I saved the logs, backed them up to 3 different locations, and started my analysis. Someone at Vertex was about to learn the same lesson Troy and Holbrook had learned in a world of digital footprints. The most dangerous person isn't the one with the most access. It's the one taking notes. The day of Holbrook's sentencing arrived with the kind of bitter cold that cuts through coats and pretense alike. 25 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, and lifetime banishment from the financial sector. As the judge read the sentence, I watched Holbrook's face crumble like a facade that had finally run out of support beams. Troy was there, in the back row, wearing his restaurant uniform under a borrowed coat. He'd gotten special permission from his probation officer to attend. When our eyes met, he nodded once, a recognition that this was how our story ended, with consequences delivered and lessons learned. Outside the courthouse, Agent Walsh found me. The Vertex financial case you flagged. We made arrests this morning. Your documentation was perfect, as always. Just doing what we do, I said. No, she corrected. You're doing what needs to be done. The FBI is actually restructuring their corporate crime division based on some of your methodologies. Turns out documenting everything works better than hoping criminals make mistakes. 6 months later, Ridgefire occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, 50 employees, 30 active clients, and a reputation that made corporate criminals think twice. We'd turned down 2 acquisition offers and 1 attempted hostile takeover that ended when we released documentation of the buyer's own insider trading. They withdrew their offer within 4 hours. I stood in my office. I had a real office now, with windows and everything looking out at the city skyline. My laptop showed 17 active monitoring dashboards, each one watching for patterns that didn't belong, for access that couldn't be justified, for the digital fingerprints of corporate malfeasance. A knock at my door. Sarah entered with a familiar manila folder. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing it over. "Came by courier. No return address." Inside was a single photo and a note. The photo showed a small restaurant in Ohio. Kendrick's Kitchen, painted on the window. Through the glass, I could see Troy carrying dishes, his face focused and, surprisingly, content. The note was in his handwriting. 6 months clean. Dad promoted me to prep cook. I learned to dice onions without crying. Turns out honest work teaches you things shortcuts never could. Thank you for documenting my worst moment. It became my turning point. I filed it with all the others. The letters from employees who'd discovered their companies were being looted. The thank you notes from shareholders saved from fraud. The grudging acknowledgments from executives who'd been caught by our systems and forced to face consequences. Patricia Wong visited that afternoon, now general counsel at the restructured Nevlin Analytics. Marcus had stepped down as CEO, bringing in fresh leadership untainted by family connections. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "We implemented every one of your recommendations. 0 tolerance for nepotism, mandatory security training, and everything gets documented now. How's the culture shift going?" "Painful but necessary. Like setting a broken bone. It hurts, but it heals stronger." She paused. "We've had 3 employees try to bypass the new protocols. Each one caught by the systems you designed. Each one terminated immediately." "Good. The system only works if everyone follows it." "Speaking of which," Patricia smiled, "I'm joining Ridgefire's advisory board. Someone needs to keep you paranoid documenters legally compliant." That evening, the 5 founding partners gathered in our conference room. We'd come so far from that first meeting in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of corporate betrayal. Now we were the ones others turned to when betrayal beckoned. "Motion to discuss the Mumbai opportunity," Elena said, pulling up her presentation. "They want us to design security protocols for the entire banking sector." "Motion to discuss the Senate testimony request," Robert added. "They're drafting new corporate governance laws and want our input." "Motion to order dinner first," James interrupted. "Can't save the corporate world on an empty stomach." We laughed. We planned. We prepared for a future where documentation might actually prevent crimes instead of just catching them after the fact. It was ambitious, probably impossible, certainly exhausting. But it was ours. My phone buzzed. The monitoring system at a new client, an aerospace company with defense contracts, showed anomalies. Someone accessing classified schematics, downloading files to unauthorized devices. The patterns were familiar, another insider thinking they were untouchable. I opened my laptop, started documenting. This was how it always began: a small deviation from normal, an access that didn't quite fit, a download that shouldn't happen. And then I would follow the trail, document every step, until the would-be criminal had built their own prison of evidence. As I worked, I thought about Troy's message on that Monday morning months ago. Give me all your passwords or you're fired. He'd thought he was delivering an ultimatum. Instead, he'd delivered an opportunity to prove that documentation beats intimidation, that patience defeats privilege, that careful preparation can bring down anyone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. Holbrook was in prison. His fortune returned to those he'd stolen from. Troy was learning humility one dish at a time. Daniel was testifying in case after case, his immunity bought with cooperation. And Nevlin Analytics stronger than ever, rebuilt on foundations of transparency and accountability. All because I'd done what I'd always done: documented everything. Every threat, every unauthorized access, every attempt to subvert systems designed to protect. The honeypot that caught Troy had been waiting 3 years for someone arrogant enough to spring it. When he finally came along, the trap was perfect because I'd had time to make it perfect. The new anomaly at the aerospace company was escalating: more downloads, more classified data, more evidence accumulating with every click. I smiled grimly and kept documenting. Another executive about to learn that, in the digital age, every crime is recorded somewhere, by someone who's paying attention. Sarah knocked and entered with coffee. New fish on the line. Aerospace exec, probably selling to competitors. Give it 2 weeks and we'll have enough for federal charges. Your superpower is terrifying, you know that. It's not a superpower, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. It's just patience and paranoia in equal measure. Document everything, trust nothing, and wait for human nature to provide the evidence. She left me to my work, to my screens full of data trails and digital breadcrumbs. Outside, the city lights twinkled like a million secrets waiting to be discovered. Somewhere in those lights, another Troy was planning to demand passwords. Another Holbrook was skimming millions. Another conspiracy was forming in the shadows of corporate ambition. And I'd be here, watching, documenting, waiting. Because that's what I did. I kept the receipts that others thought they'd thrown away. I preserved the evidence that criminals thought they'd hidden. I remembered what everyone else wanted to forget. Troy had demanded my passwords that Monday morning, thinking he could take what wasn't his. Instead, he'd walked into a trap 3 years in the making and started a chain reaction that brought down a criminal empire and built something better in its place. The real password, the one that actually mattered, wasn't to any system or database. It was simpler than that: document everything, trust but verify, and never, ever stop watching. My screens flickered with new data, new patterns, new stories waiting to be told. I settled in for a long night of documentation, knowing that somewhere, someone was making a mistake they thought no one would notice. They were wrong. They were always wrong. Because I noticed everything, and I wrote it all down. So I let him hit enter, and then I watched him fall. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your thoughts on Emily's journey, and whether you've ever witnessed similar workplace injustices. If you enjoyed this tale of documentation defeating deception, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And if you really want to help this story reach more people who need to hear that patience and preparation can overcome privilege and power, please hit the hype button. Your support helps these stories find their audience. Until next time, remember, document everything.